Now we move immediately to Dr. Jian and Usha Rodrigues on this very interesting topic of fake news in India and China.
Thank you for that. I am going to start the presentation and then Jian will follow me. And if just to break the conversation a little bit, what time would it be in, Peking and China, the other places where?
2 hours, 2 hours time difference. So it's 1:43 at the moment.
Right. Okay. All right. Okay. So I'm going to now share the PowerPoint and we'll play there. I don't know. We seem to have become more and more dependent on the PowerPoint presentations. Hopefully we could do something different, and the last presentation was a bit different. Okay, so what we are going to talk about is regulation of COVID-19 fake news, infodemic in China and India. So I will start with the Indian case study, and then Jian will follow up with Chinese case study. So we wanted to basically have a look at what is really happening, like in terms of how are the governments in these two most populous countries are trying to combat fake news or the flow of fake news. So there are some basic statistics. I'm just going to go through them very quickly. We know as of today, 31.5 million people have been infected, minimum. This is officially recorded by COVID-19, and nearly 1 million people now have died. But there is a parallel pandemic, which is basically sweeping the world, and which is the infodemic of misleading and false information, which continues to put lives at risk. So what do we mean by that? The thing is, everybody is consuming news on social media. And in fact, when we use machine learning to analyze how many of the posts are actually not produced by human beings, even for that matter. So the 40% of the news came from unreliable sources in one of the studies. In the other study, it showed that 42% of them were produced by bots. Reuters Institute found that a third of the social media users have either false or misleading, have actually seen false or misleading information about COVID on their social media platforms. In fact, what has happened is, as a result of this, a number of fact-checking organizations have come together and they formed an alliance. And as per their record, till date, about 7,100 false or misleading pieces of information have been unproved by them. So there is an effort on to basically, to try and stop the scourge of fake news that is spreading across the world. So world bodies like WHO and United Nations, they have urged the social media companies to do something, take tougher actions against fake news being spread on their platforms. They have, the United Nations has also asked governments really to do something about, regulating the spread of this information. So false information apparently is spreading faster than even the virus, and bogus claims like eating bat soup or can give you COVID-19, or COVID-19 can be cured by using garlic and some of the other ways. So you can see how it is impacting on how people see or receive information and consume this information, and sometimes that obviously leads to deaths or infections and other racism and other issues. Anyway, so these are number of strategies that are being I guess employed around the world, which is technology companies. They are trying to moderate or remove misleading and false content. They are also using AI, which is the artificial intelligence and machine learning solutions to, again, find ways to reduce the circulation of these false, fake news information, and of course the government regulation that comes in. And then in addition to that, as I referred in my earlier slide, there are fact-checking organizations which are funded by either mainstream media or tech companies or governments or philanthropic organizations. They are all trying to basically somehow find ways to end this infodemic, which continues to grow. So now the thesis of our paper, to some extent, which is we're going to be exploring a lot more, is looking at how each government is responding. And each government's response is basically limited by their own political system and the media system that they have in their country. So governments, for example, in more liberal democracies, they remain torn between the need to preserve citizens' freedom of speech, but at the same time, they need to curtail the circulation of fake news. And when we do this comparison between India and China, to some extent, we do kind of come across the dichotomy, which is India being a democracy, whereas China has a communist rule where they definitely have had much more success in controlling fake news than, of course, India has had. Now, just very quickly, so that I don't go over time, India is obviously is one of the fastest growing internet or social media user base right now in the world. That's why some of the social media companies are, very much in India trying to expand their business. But the other infrastructure factor is that 86% of Indians have a mobile phone subscription, and India also has the cheapest data available to people to use, that is mobile data available, which basically has meant that many people are able to access some of the social media apps and Facebook, WhatsApp, and other messaging apps, and that's where they are communicating with each other. The other fact of the matter is that India also has one of the largest mainstream media. So I'm talking about 100,000 news periodicals. I'm talking about 850 different television channels and more than 1,000 radio channels. So it's a huge media environment, and Indians do consume quite a bit of media. But the other fact remains is that freedom of speech and expression is guaranteed as a fundamental right under the Indian Constitution. There are some caveats, but it is guaranteed under the Constitution. Okay, so what does that mean? What else has happened is that because of the in recent past, and I've done quite a bit of research in this space, is in recent past, the politicians have been quite um, um, uh, prolific in using social media for their communication because they don't want to go through the mainstream media. And now this direct communication with using the social media has allowed them to communicate with their followers, including the Prime Minister Modi. So as a result, and also the infrastructural reference that I made to data being so cheap, and mobile services being so inexpensive, that people, increasing number of Indians have access to the apps and the social media, both in urban and rural areas. So once the COVID-19 came to India, the government decided to basically impose the Disaster Management Act of 2005, under which they made it a criminal offense to create any kind of panic with the information. They also use some of the colonial era epidemic disease act to invoke, to say that any misleading publication, any publication of misleading information will be punishable, which is all normal for any country. They also asked social media companies to disable and remove false information on a priority basis. They launched a MyGov Corona chatbot on WhatsApp to ensure that they were providing verified information to people, health information to people. But then the next two step is where there is the dichotomy comes in, which is the Prime Minister asked mainstream media to publish positive stories about COVID-19. And then also his government, they decided to go to the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in the land, to actually refrain news outlets from publishing COVID-related stories without the government's clearance. Of course, India being a democracy, that request was declined by the Supreme Court. But it did show that how the government was trying to extend their capacity to control the flow of information in the country in the name of trying to combat Facebook. Fake news. Facebook. I think they're synonymous anyway, fake news. So, but the other additional problem the Indian government also has is that its own politicians and leaders, they tend to start circulating news or fake cures about COVID, especially things like, drinking cow urine can cure COVID-19. So it's to some extent that takes away from the credibility of the government's strategy. The other thing for which the Indian government has been criticized quite a bit is they also use the strategy of shutting down the internet in parts of India in the name of wanting to curb the flow of fake news. And of course, there have been quite a bit of backlash where people have criticized the government for using this fake news as a way of trying to control political opposition and civil unrest. So to that extent, the complex trade-off between the state power and the freedom of speech continues, and it will continue to remain an underlying theme in the story of how fake news is tackled across the world. And I hand over to Jian. Sorry.
And Jen, if you can be quite concise, that will be great. Because
yes, I will be. Yeah, let me share my slides with you guys. So can you see my slides? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Usha. I will follow up with China's experience of governing COVID-related fake news. China has the largest internet and mobile phone users and also face the fake news challenge like India. However, China seems to be one of the very few nations that have effectively combated COVID fake news. So in my part of the presentation, I'd like to talk about how COVID fake news is governed in practice and why such governance is more effective in China than in many other countries. Before I start, I'd like to clarify a terminology. In Chinese, rumor, 谣言, is widely used as a synonym of fake news, especially in media and policies. So I will use the word rumor throughout my presentation to refer to fake news. Since late January this year, China initiated a nationwide and top-down anti-online rumor campaign to combat fake news in the pandemic. And the campaign involves multiple stakeholders, including the central and local governments, state media, social media platforms, and the public. First, the Cyberspace Administration of China, CAC, the governing body of China's internet content and cybersecurity at both central and local levels, set up dedicated COVID rumor refuting sections on their existing rumor refuting platforms. For example, the Beijing rumor refuting platform had exposed over 600 rumors about COVID-19 by September the 14th and clarified corresponding truths for all the misinformation collected. Popular social media and news aggregator applications like WeChat, Douyin, and Toutiao initiated their special rectification campaign against COVID-19 rumor as a response to the top-down governance, as well as an important part of the corporate responsibility. And fake news has been quickly deleted from these platforms, and the accounts that spread rumors were quickly shut down by these platforms. And moreover, the CAC state media and internet giants like Tsinghua News and Tencent News provide platform for rumor detection and fact-checking, and audience can easily use these fact-checking tools to verify information which they suspect as fake news. In addition, mass mobilization and propaganda also play a very important role in combating fake news. And during the pandemic, like the propaganda banners and posters printing something like do not produce, circulate, or believe rumors and be law-abiding citizens have been plastered all over cities and villages. And rumor mongers who spread fake news on social media have been detained by local police in accordance with the Security Administration Punishment Law. So why COVID fake news is not very challenging and has been effectively handled by the Chinese government? So I think the success of China's fake news governance in the pandemic is mainly attributed to China's well-established online rumor refuting system, online public sentiment monitoring system at different levels, as well as a long-term state internet giants alliance to sanitize China's cyberspace. And China's first cybersecurity law implemented in 2017, and various existing regulations on internet group information, online comment, social media, audio-visual site, live streaming service have provided legal and regulatory basis for the government to regulate fake news effectively in the pandemic. So we can see that the Chinese government is fully prepared rather than being hectic while facing the fake news challenge in the pandemic. So from India's fake news governance in the pandemic, we can see as a democratic nation, India is leaning to adopt some authoritarian measures to combat fake news, such as enhancing its censorship on news media, ordering self-censorship of social media, and shutting down internet in some areas of the country. So it seems that the multilateral internet governance model promoted by China, which emphasizes the government's leading role and multiple actors' cooperation and participation, has been adopted and practiced by democratic nations like India. So does it mean that the state-centric approach of internet governance is more effective than multi-stakeholder approach promoted by Western democracies in governing fake news and maintaining social order in the pandemic? Or can we say that there's a trend of blended model of internet governance in the making in governing COVID-related fake news in established democracies? We'd like to leave these questions open for discussion rather than draw a hectic conclusion on the questions. And we believe that the cross-cultural dialogue and more comparative study on the fake news governance in nations of different political systems like China and India could help us to find a better solution to combat global fake news phenomenon in the pandemic and post the COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you, Usha. Thank you, Jian. I think this is really interesting. And also we have a very lively discussion in the chat box about what's the difference between fake news, disinformation, malinformation, and all the other sort of misusage of information. So I look forward to the discussion later. And certainly also with regards to, this social, fake news and the social media in particular, also that's become also the technology issue, what kind of apps you use for spreading, messages and social media. For instance, in India, a lot of Chinese apps are not now available for download. I think there's some multi-dimensional approach to this kind of social media and news spread. And of course, the issue of fake news or disinformation is also hot on EU-China relations. Yesterday, I heard the European Parliament special session with the Chinese ambassador to the EU, and one of the questions frequently raised by European Parliament parliamentarians is about disinformation and the role of China, and also that important for EU-China relations. So we move very